Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming to today's talk with Ripple. We're honored to have John Lee Hancock join us. Before we go into the actual content of the talk, following John Lee Hancock's discussion with Josh Blair, we're going to have a Q&A session where you guys can go ahead and ask questions to John Lee Hancock. You can either type your questions directly into the chat box, or you can type into the chat box that you would like to verbally state your question to John, and you can do either or. Just say whichever one in the chat box, and then I will go ahead and do a first come basis for each of the questions, and as we'll try to answer as many as time permits.
All right.
So if Josh, you take it away.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming out today, and thank you, John, for taking the time to be here with us to do this event. We're super excited about that. Before we get started, we just kind of want to briefly introduce ourselves and our mission, and tell you a bit why we're orchestrating these events. So with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, we believe that now more than ever, there's a need for online inspiration. In our entrepreneurship class, we came up with this idea that we want to facilitate conversations with experts in their respective fields, to create more inspiration online, and hopefully facilitate and create a platform of audience and speaker interaction. We hope to give a generation of viewers a chance to continue their learning and find new inspirations. I also do want to include this whole idea started after John gave a chat with us in our class, and we just thought it was really interesting getting to hear his experience, his background, and just someone who's had a ton of experience in their expertise and field. And we just left it really inspired and decided, let's go ahead and create this platform and start orchestrating events. We had two prior to this, with one the CEO of StockX, Josh Luber, and one the CEO of Arena Labs, Brian Ferguson. And we have more to come. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce John. John is, as many of you know, is a screenwriter, film director, and producer. He directed amazing films such as The Rookie, The Blind Side, Saving Mr. Banks, The Founder, and The Highwaymen. Prior to film, John went to law school at Baylor before he decided to start his film career. He also has a film called The Little Things coming next year. Without further ado, please everyone join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to John. Thank you so much. How are you doing, John?
I'm great. It's nice to be here. Nice to be here in all this, the craziness out in the world. And I'm in my, I have a little office about 10 minutes from home where kind of nobody's here except for me. So that's where I am right now. So if you hear a fire truck go by, sometimes the street behind gets a little loud, but it'll pass.
Oh, that's awesome. Is that just your work area where you?
Yeah, it's just a writing office that I've had for 13 years, I guess. It started off when my kids were little. I would write in a certain part of the home, and kids being kids, they're always like, "Hey, Dad, let's go do this, let's go do that," which is really nice, but it also is not conducive to getting work done. So I've had this office for a good long while now, and like I said, it's 5 to 10 minutes from my home, so it's really quite easy.
That's awesome. This is great. You can get the space and just work on creative things and your work. So first, I just want to kind of start off. We gathered a ton of questions, over 120 questions from audience members. So it's a lot to narrow down into this conversation. But I kind of just wanted to start off this chat with like the 3 most popular questions. And I think the first one was one you kind of spoke about when you came to chat into our class. But what brought you into the film industry, and what was it that one attracted you, and also like what was the spark moment that made you decide, I don't like I don't want to continue down a path of law, and just started writing.
It's a like most stories in Hollywood, it's circuitous. And I started off. I grew up in a refinery town in Texas called Texas City, Texas. I didn't know anyone whose dad or mom was a writer or a filmmaker, certainly. And so it was never really a career option for me thinking in my young head. However, from the time I was probably fourth or fifth grade, I always loved to write. And I would write almost a short story every day. Now, they were very small, short stories, but I would write one a day. And, you can't help but get a little better, and I enjoyed it. When I was in college, I got an English undergrad degree, and I didn't quite know what to do with it. I was writing a lot of short fiction then, and it had a few things published in minor publications and things, but I didn't feel like that I probably, one, could make a living doing it, and two, I worried that I wasn't quite good enough. During college, I also started falling in love with movies and going to the movie theater as often as possible, and there were some great movies that inspired me and kind of were life-changing in some ways. And by life-changing, I mean you were thinking about them the next day and a week later, and they had some little tiny impact on you in your life. Like I said, I didn't know what to do with my degree. I'd been accepted to law school at Baylor, where I went to undergrad as well, and thought, well, you know what, I'll go to law school because that'll give me 3 years to figure it out. It's not really a smart plan because law school is expensive, and it's, hard, and there's not a lot of time to figure. But regardless, I kept writing while I was in law school. And then when I got to the end of law school, I started interviewing for jobs, and I was kind of torn because I wasn't sure that I wanted to practice law. But I also didn't quite know what else to do. And so I took a job with a law firm in Houston and practiced law for almost 4 years. During that time there, I started writing screenplays and plays, dramatic plays. Shut down the short fiction pretty much and concentrated on screenplays. Sundance Institute, and there's the big Sundance Film Festival and everything. They were a small group back then, but they had satellite programs in different parts of America. And now they have satellite programs all around the world to have lecturers come and for writers and directors to learn their craft from people who've been doing it for a while. I got accepted. I wrote a script and got accepted. Was one of 8 people accepted to a Sundance satellite writers program in Austin, Texas, where over the next 4 days, a guy named Frank Danielle, who had been Roman Polanski's film teacher and the head of the film school at Columbia, the head of the film school at USC, he just eviscerated all our scripts in a nice way, but still let us all know we had a long way to go. I came from that experience and thought, well, I'm not without talent. I had enough talent to get into one of these 8 spots. So I started making my plans to move to either New York or California. I had several friends in New York, and so I visited both places. I had no friends in California. Visited both places and thought I probably should move to California because it was a little more in the mix in terms of movies, but kind of more importantly, there were more people that you came across who worked in the industry, despite the fact that I didn't know any of them. And also in New York, I thought I'll just rely on my old friends who live there and are investment bankers or working in fashion or these kind of things, and I won't struggle as much socially, which I thought was probably not a bad thing for me to be on my own and having to work really hard. So I made the decision, moved to California, and worked myriad odd jobs to pay the rent. Started working production, being a PA, getting coffee, moving cable, all that kind of fun stuff. I worked in most departments for mostly commercials. I did one movie. I think my first credit is My Demon Lover, which is a New Line Cinema movie where I was a PA. But movies, they took too long. And what I was trying to do was, if I could find a situation where I could work hard for 2 weeks and then write for 2 weeks, work for 2 weeks and write for 2 weeks. which is hard to come about. But with commercials, I could do that. I could be a PA for a couple of weeks and then write, pay my rent, go back to work, write, and do that. And so after several years, I had a theater company. I started a theater company and wrote and directed plays. I, like I said, got to know more people, kept writing scripts, got an agent, and then after about 4 or 5 years, my first movie was made, and it was called A Perfect World. Clint Eastwood directed it, starring Kevin Costner, when Kevin was the biggest movie star in the world. And that was a real liftoff for me, and I never kind of looked back. I never had to go do odd jobs again. Since then, I've been writing, and now since the year 2000, writing, directing, writing and directing, writing or directing, producing, just project to project.
That's awesome. And you mentioned that like in the beginning you didn't know that you could make a career out of it, and I think a lot of questions we had were a lot of people who had doubts about entering figuring out their career, but also entering the industry. We had a lot of people RSVP from different film schools. With your experience, what advice would you give students right now who are maybe a bit apprehensive of the current economic conditions and trying to also find work this early on as a student?
Well, I think it's twofold. First, to the people that are interested in the industry that I work in. There's no doubt that COVID will have people reimagining entertainment, how we produce entertainment, how we view entertainment. We'll see what this does to the poor, movie theater community. Even when they're open, when are people going to be wanting to go back? If they go back and it's 25% occupancy, how can they make a living? My great fear in that regard is that we'll only have Marvel movies in the theaters, and that everything else will be streaming, just because they're the guaranteed big over-the-top roller coaster rides. I hope that's not the case. I hope, sincerely. But I have to say, with streaming, I did a movie for Netflix, even though it was released in theaters for Academy consideration and all that. It was in theaters before it was on Netflix. It was a Netflix original, and they were fantastic. The process was very much the same, except for the distribution model. And it has opened up a lot of doors for people. There's more content now than ever, as you probably recognize. When you're sitting at night on your couch and trying to figure out what to watch, there's a plethora of different programs and shows, and you probably have friends that say you should watch this show, and you've never heard of it. And that, even 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. Everybody would have heard of most everything that was being broadcast. So I think there's in some ways, COVID dependent, this has been a golden age for content creators. And it doesn't necessarily always mean that they're going to be compensated at the level the content creators were 10 years ago. But it gave more opportunity for people starting out and dipping a toe in the water and having opportunities, because all these streaming services were rabid in their search for more stuff to put on. It's kind of a little similar to back in the late 80s when video stores first opened, before Blockbuster. And you had this thing called VHS where you could actually rent a movie, and it wasn't a matter of The Wizard of Oz comes on once a year on a Sunday night on Wonderful World of Disney or whatever, and you had to watch it and tape it. You actually had places you could go and rent tapes, which was a revelation. And because of that, there were a whole lot of movies that were created more specifically for straight to video. So there was a lot of stuff happening then. With streaming, another new market, if you will, there's a lot more opportunity for content creators. I know it's a fearful time, and there's no production going on. I mean, scripts are, I'm writing, and I've set stuff up. to do, but who knows when we'll be able to actually do it. I'm finishing a movie right now, editing wise, and doing that remotely has been difficult. I don't know how we're going to get an orchestra together to do the score for the movie. But I'm adapting a book right now and then doing a rewrite on the latest Bourne movie. So I'm staying really busy, and that's nice. But there are a lot of people that are, let's say, directors and not writers who are, they're sitting there going, when can I direct? When can I be on a set? And it's a scary thing. So we'll see. In terms of film school, I would have loved to have had the opportunity to go to film school. But I kind of felt like it was me at the age of 28, I believe, when I moved to Los Angeles. I felt like that it would probably benefit me more to keep writing and do that rather than commit to film school. I mean, even if I didn't have gotten in, I don't know. But I would have loved the camaraderie, the healthy competition, trading stories. I just had me by myself in a crappy apartment in Hollywood. So I would have loved and appreciated that. It didn't happen. Film school is certainly not necessary, except for it might be for you. And I think I would have benefited from it, but I didn't have the opportunity. So it all worked out. As for other people not in the film business, in terms of COVID in the future, and I'm sure many of you have had internships yanked out from under your feet, which is really, really sad. And I know it probably is scary because you guys are, in a spot in your life where you're trying to lay a foundation for the future and a launch pad for what you want to do and figuring things out and knowing that, you can try this internship and go, I know I don't want to do that, but maybe over here. And so some of those opportunities have gone by the wayside for now. I'm sure they'll come back, but I just think that you have to find ways to provide your own internship, perhaps some project that you wouldn't have thought of. Now, granted, that may mean spending a whole lot more time, in your parents' house than you were anticipating.
Yeah.
But, my suggestion would be to, get them on board with it, be proactive and say, yeah, my internship isn't happening this summer. Here's my plan. I want to learn something this summer. I want to do something this summer and enlist them in the process. That would be my advice. And whether that has something to do, like this very project that you guys are on and have created, which is terrific, or something else. I would just say, stay occupied. And I don't know, in my life, I've found this out just because I'm old now. Every setback is just an opportunity. And I know it sounds like a cliche or something you'd get in a fortune cookie, but every downturn, I promise you, if you start to analyze it like, this is a rare opportunity and I'm going to take advantage. I mean, for instance, this COVID stuff is like, it threw everybody for a loop for a couple of weeks. You're at home going, what am I going to do? I'm trying to work. Everybody's worried about everything. And then I thought, you know what? This is a rare opportunity to really pause my editing process and take a slower approach because nobody's really moving forward. We're going to keep editing and I get longer time to edit the movie. So I get to try stuff that may seem crazy, that on a normal schedule I wouldn't get to try. So trying crazy stuff and also just saying, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take on a writing project. I'm going to take on a book to adapt. And I'm excited about that because I pretty much did back-to-back movies with the Highwaymen and the Little Things. And, it's taxing physically directing movies. And, and on this one, I had Denzel Washington, Rami Malek, and Jared Leto. So I've got 3 Academy Award winners, all with very different processes, coming to the set. And so you have to figure out the bandwidth necessary to figure out how to allow them each to do their best work when it's different for all 3 of them. It, takes a lot out of you. So I'm kind of happy to be in my crappy little office and writing.
That's really interesting advice. It can certainly, I know all our kind of teammates who are not in the film industry at all, but that's really useful advice, I feel like, for all industries in general. We've been seeing a lot of people saying that even though when there's a lot of problems, there's a lot of opportunity to solve those problems. And so, like you said, this time period is really interesting because I feel like there's going to be a a lot of new solutions and a lot of new things coming into different industries, and a lot of industries being disrupted. And I guess we'll see moving forward how everything changes.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. It's funny. My kids are twins, a boy and a girl, and they're both um, in their second year of college. But I remember when they were in high school, their principal was talking to all the parents and said, "This generation is the first in America where a majority of them will somehow create their own jobs." And I took that and thought about it, and I said, I think he's right. I mean, I'm not saying there won't be, traditional jobs that exist, and yes, and all that, but people thinking outside the box and looking to solve problems that they see on the horizon in different ways. And I also think that for several generations now, we've, at least the last couple of three, we put so much pressure on kids in high school and college, one from an academic level, but more than anything to figure out who you are and what you're going to do. And, it's the equivalent of the mom who wants you to be a lawyer or a doctor, from the time you're little, and the pressure of that. And I just keep thinking about my story and how I went to law school. My parents are both public school teachers. So for them to pay for me to go to law school was a lot. And for me to leave the practice of law when they were so happy and proud that I was paying my own way and was a lawyer, and the fact that my dad said, "Hey, look, you know what? Now's the time. You can always come back and practice law. If you really want to do this, you've always been a hard worker, go work harder than ever and try it." And I think there's some good advice in there, because I think I'm surrounded by my kids' friends who are all in college, schools all over America, and all of them are trying to figure out what that job is they want to do. And I said, well, wait, you're 20 years old. Maybe there is that person who's 20 years old and knows exactly what they're going to be in their life, and they dedicate themselves to it, and that's the rest of their life. I think it's a minority of 20-year-olds. I think the 20s, at least from a European concept, is meant to be, how many mistakes can I make? I don't mean getting thrown into jail or anything. I'm talking about failed ventures, or I'm going to try this. Oh, I hate that. And then coming into your own somewhere in your late 20s, where we talked about this before, how I had a theory that it was amazing how many people I came across that were successful and doing interesting things, who said that just around the age of 28 was when they started, that it was like a door opened and they saw the world in a different way. For me, that was definitely the case. I think a lot of people, they get out of college and then maybe they go get a job and work. And at first, that's so cool. I mean, I've got a place to go. People treat me with respect. Maybe I'm wearing a suit, car, and I've got an apartment, and I'm an adult, and I'm living a life, and I'm taking care of my business. And after a while, you go, that's not quite enough. It's enough for a while, but it's not quite enough. And some people go to grad school and whatever. But then after about the time you get to about 28 or so, you start to think, what is the rest of now that I've worked, I've got a lot of education behind me. And now that I've worked and out here, is this going to be okay for me when I'm 60 years old? Is this something I love enough? And I'm interested, more importantly, does this interest me, really interest me, so that, when I go to work, I really, really like it. Now, I'm an exception to the general rule. I realize that there are a lot of people that are forced to work to have the pleasure, of a family, a house, those kind of things. For me, work is just as much of the pleasure. I mean, it's my hobby that I make a living at. It's a thing that I would do for free that I get paid well for.
That's really interesting, and that's really interesting advice. And I think that how you mentioned opportunities now and our generation making our own jobs is very much so true. Like my teammates and I were talking about how easy it was to put this thing all together just with technology. Like it's so easy to start something up and get a functioning website and start your own business, and now more so than ever. Um, so I want to hand it over to Hisham now so that we can get some questions from the audience because we've had a lot in the RSVP. Hisham, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, definitely. As mentioned earlier, for anyone who wants to ask a question, you can go ahead and either type your question into the chat, or you can type in that you want to ask a question yourself, and I'll go ahead and unmute you. So whoever wants to get that ball rolling, we can go ahead and get the Q&A started. Awesome. So the first person who wants to ask a question is Jonathan Oliveira. So I'll go ahead and unmute you so you can go ahead and ask. One question, 1 second. All right.
Hey, John, how are you?
Hey, I'm good.
My question was that as a writer, how do you stay away from recycling ideas into new scripts whenever it comes to writing new stories and structuring those things?
That's a really good question. I think, one, you don't want to repeat yourself. You're pretty aware of what you've written, but there are some things, sometimes there's one little thing that you'll put in a script that then falls out and it'll be in the back of your head forever. Like, it doesn't work in today's world, but when I first started out writing, I wanted to write a story about a character who liked to go to airport bars and drink. And back then, it was when you could go to the gates, you could pick up people, there was no TSA and all that stuff. And just the psychology behind someone who couldn't travel himself or was afraid to travel, I don't know, but who liked to watch people going and coming. And so, that's one of those things that's hanging out there that at some point may resurrect itself and morph into something else. But I think you always have to challenge yourself. And if you find yourself writing something where it's yeah, I can't wait to get to this part, then you got to focus back on the prior, because it's not good enough. There are certain recycling things that aren't necessarily bad. There are tropes that are perhaps underused or haven't been overexposed that always work. This always works. And, I think it was Flannery O'Connor or somebody who said there are only 12 stories and we keep retelling them as though they'd never been told before. So I think there's a familiarity, especially from a Western civilization storytelling standpoint, to recycle stories. Mm-hmm. We come across things that are familiar, whether, when you're reading Joseph Campbell or something, and the different steps, that a hero's journey, you immediately recognize, you go, okay, and I can name, on this chapter, this is the next step of the hero's journey. I can name 40 movies just off the top of my head where this happened. Now, there are variations on that, but so I think that, yes, you want to make sure that you don't repeat yourself as much as you're able, and don't be lazy, but also understand that there are some tropes that work for a reason. So,
thank you.
Awesome. All right. So the next person who would like to ask a question is Shapley. Go ahead and unmute you. All right.
Hey, Mr. Hancock. I'm Shapley Davis. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So first of all, I'm a Texan, so naturally I love your work. Just wanted to say that. But my question for you, I was born in Dallas. My family's from Fort Worth, and actually my namesake is Shapley Ross, who built the first house in Waco. So I'm very familiar with Waco. I love Baylor, and I love the town.
Great.
Anyway, my question for you is about your first film, because you mentioned how you first wrote this, all of a sudden it's being directed by Clint Eastwood and Kevin Costner starring in it. And I mean, he was like you said, he was the biggest star in the world at the time. So can you tell us a little bit more about that story and how that all got rolling?
Yeah, to be perfectly clear, I wrote and directed one other little movie before that was like $100,000 movie that was by intention a straight-to-video movie that was a nightmare. It was called Vaya con Dios, and it's okay, but I don't really even count it. And then A Perfect World, when I wrote it, I was a pocket client of an agent named Rhonda Gomez here in town. And she read the script and loved it. When pocket client means you're not actually signed, because some of the people in the literary department said he writes movies that are too old. Because at the time I was writing this, it was all buddy cop movies and Lethal Weapon and quippy guys with guns, and I didn't write any of that stuff. So I was a pocket client, not fully signed, but she represented me. So she read it, liked it a lot. And said, and I was trying to direct it. And at that time, there was some German money that was interested in perhaps making a low budget version of this with me directing. And she said, I think you should tap the brakes on the German money because maybe it'll come true, maybe it won't. I think this is a movie that can get made in Hollywood right now. I'm going to send it to 5 producers that I know. I'm going to tell them to read it themselves. A lot of people will pass out a script to an assistant to get coverage on it. It's what it's called, giving it a thumbs up or thumbs down kind of. She said, read this yourself and let me know. And so it went out on a Friday, and on Monday I had 5 meetings set up. One with each of the producers, during the week. They weren't all the same day. It was like one a day or something. And 4 of the 5 said, we love this. It's kind of a 70s movie, so we're not sure we can get it made. But what else do you have? Or we have a book here that we'd like you to look at and think about adapting and all that kind of stuff. So I go, wow, this is great. I'm going to have jobs. One of the producers, Mark Johnson, liked it and wanted to option it. He was the one who said, I think we should try to make this into a movie. And so he optioned it, and Clint Eastwood came on board. And this was before Unforgiven. So Clint was in kind of a downturn period. He had several movies that didn't work at the box office, and he was, he'd never won an Academy Award or any of that stuff. He was looked at as kind of a B-level actor and kind of a B-level director who was a good director, but, did kind of stuff, other movies that were marketplace movies and everything else, with the exception of Bird. It's a really interesting, good movie about Charlie Parker, the jazz musician. But so I met with Clint, and he talked about the script in a way, he's not a man of many words, but he said it kind of reminded him of a movie called Lonely Are the Brave, which is one of my favorite movies, and was Kirk Douglas's favorite movie that he ever did. So I knew that, I said, okay, you get this thematically, you understand what the movie is. And then, the next thing you know, it was just like, boom, boom, boom. Kevin Costner's involved. Warner Brothers is making this movie. So it was, an overnight success, 5 years in the making.
Wow. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
Awesome. Yeah. So the next person we have is Hannah Tootin, who would like to ask a question. Let me just unmute her. All right.
Hi, thanks again for being here and giving us all this advice. You mentioned earlier the overload of content, which applies, I think, not just to films, but also, advertising, brands, startups even. With all that competition out there, what advice do you have for us, as most of us here, I think, are in our 20s, to stand out? And generally, what sort of life skills do you think are most important that we will gain along the early stages of our careers?
Wow, it's a great question. And there are lots of answers. And in general, I would say unbridled optimism is always attractive. And I don't mean optimism like, oh, the world's a wonderful place and all that. I'm talking about optimism with regard to opportunity. And someone who's thinking outside the box, someone who's doing the extra, is always important. I know you have to get in front of someone to to show off those skills sometimes. But I just think there's being pessimistic about stuff is not going to help. You can be frustrated. You can have downturns. We all get sad and depressed about certain things, but you have to believe that the right thing's going to happen. The right thing's going to come along. You're up for a job or an internship and you don't get it. You go, well, okay, that wasn't in the plan. I'm moving to the next. And it seems like more often than not, what happens is you find something else eventually and you go, wow, how different would my life have been had I gotten that? I mean, out of law school, because I didn't know if I wanted to practice law, I started interviewing with all kinds of people. I mean, and I interviewed with Goldman Sachs and thought, well, I don't know. But there's a lesson in this too. And I went through a couple of different interviews and they wanted me to go to New York and it felt like I was going to get the job, and I'd be stupidly wealthy now had I taken it. But all the people in the business school who were going after those Goldman Sachs jobs, some of them weren't getting second interviews. And I did. And so I go, okay, I'm an English major and a lawyer and a writer. Why is that interesting to investment banking? And they said, you're exactly what we want. We want someone who's creatively solving problems and can tell a story, because that's what we do. We look at data, we create a story. We think outside the box. We are always looking for the alternative as opposed to this is the way business school taught me to do this. He said, we're lousy with those people. We really want creative thinkers, and you're smart enough and all that stuff. And you haven't just been locked down in the business school. You have a liberal arts degree. You went to law school, all these things. So I think staying open to the opportunities. And I think maybe the most important advice I can give, at least for me, is you learn more about yourself from failed opportunities or internships. There's great power in knowing what you don't want to do. And sometimes the only way to find out what you don't want to do is to try it. So you go down an alley and it's a cul-de-sac and you bang your head, and then bang your head. And you go, boy, I don't want to do that. I thought I wanted to try this. I didn't like that. That puts you closer to the thing that you're going to fall into, and it's going to feel completely natural and warm and wonderful.
Awesome. That answer was very optimistic in itself. Thank you.
I'm
basically kind of an optimistic person. So.
Yeah, thank you a lot for the answer. The next question we have is from Dean Quinlan. I'll go ahead and unmute him, and he can ask that to you directly. Dean?
Yeah, thank you. So I recently just finished your movie you directed, The Founder, and one of the themes of the movie, persistence, I think, was really inspiring to me. And I think in the context of becoming future filmmakers, I wanted to ask how much does the theme of persistence kind of apply to the people in our 20s over here who are looking to be successful filmmakers who can tell their stories to a wide audience?
I think persistence is absolutely, if not the most valuable, one of the most valuable traits. I mean, there are lots of talented, really smart people on the wayside or, off to the side or in the gutters of every street in America. But persistence will help a lot and push you through. I mean, The Founder's an interesting story because on the one hand, I wanted to create a very gray movie. And I like the fact that there's some people that say, hey, Ray Kroc did what he had to do. He created fast food as we know it. And we wouldn't have McDonald's, and it's an international empire. And he had the foresight and persistence to do it. Other people say, oh, Ray Kroc's evil, McDonald's is evil and it's everywhere and all that. And you could make an argument for both sides, but I was kind of drawn to the idea of a guy because there's no doubt that you can say a lot of bad things about Ray Kroc, but even his worst enemies said no one outworked him. Now, at the time he came across the burger stand in San Bernardino, California, he was 52, I believe. And back then, 52 was like today's 70. You were supposed to be looking toward retirement. And he had not yet rung the bell. He had had many businesses, some a little more successful than others, but was just not struggling, had a very, nice middle-class existence, but felt like I'm smarter and I work harder than anybody I know. And how come I haven't rung the bell? And so that was his opportunity, and he jumped on it. And he also went all in. I mean, he mortgaged his house without telling his wife, not really a smart thing to do, but nonetheless, he pushed all the chips on the table and said, you're not going to outwork me. So I have a great deal of admiration for Ray Kroc in that regard. Other regards, not so much. But I think persistence, another thing is that, you guys will probably do like my kids do. It's like, yeah, right, boomer kind of stuff, And I tell my kids, I go, look, here's the thing. The people that you're reaching out to for jobs and things like that, they're a lot of times in their 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever. They're from a different generation. Don't lose who you are, but also don't disavow who they are. What I'm saying is, getting a handwritten thank you note, which sounds like something from 250 years ago. You want to stand out? That's how you stand out. Something like that. Somebody taking the time to do it, as opposed to 200 emails that are really lovely and everything else. But all of a sudden you get something that's handwritten, you go, well, I'm paying attention to that because it's the only one of those, and that's just an example of things. I'm not saying, you got to write all thank you notes. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that there are certain things that people in power, adults, your elders, kind of appreciate and enjoy. But the thing is, most people my age and younger that are in businesses and stuff have had amazing, hope for your generation. I mean, I think it's fantastic. Now, maybe I'm looking at it through the lens that I have to kids that just turned 20. So I'm around more of that and how they're thinking. But I have a great deal of hope, and there's so much promise shown in this. I think a lot more promise in this generation than probably the last, who were they all wanted to do was go work for Goldman Sachs. So nothing wrong with Goldman Sachs, but they can't hire everybody.
That's very true. Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. So the next person we have is Ben. I'll go ahead and unmute him. All right.
Hey, John. Thanks so much for talking to us again.
Sure.
I was just kind of wondering about your process as a writer and director. When you have both of those positions on a film, how do you kind of stay true to the original concept you had in your mind without kind of getting tunnel visioned and locked into a specific narrative that's kind of only your own?
That's an excellent question. I lucked into a work and thought process, and I'll explain in a second. A script is just, more than anything, a lovely blueprint for a building you're going to build. And there are going to be adjustments along the way, or even as you're building it, you go, this was the most fantastic architectural plan I've ever seen. But now that I think of it, I think we need a bathroom on the first floor, and then you go, oh, well, you have to adjust to things. The world changes, and you've got to adjust to everything all the time. See what the day will give you. So I understood that because I had had movies made with other people directing and seeing how they changed, somewhat tonally, sometimes a line of dialogue. Clint Eastwood was very good to me. He let me be on the set for the entire making of A Perfect World. He had just won an Oscar for Unforgiven. Kevin Costner had just won an Oscar for Dances with Wolves, directing Dances with Wolves. So I had 2 Academy Award-winning directors on the set with me, and both of them were open to me asking thousands of questions. Clint's answers were usually yes and no, but Kevin would go on and on and on. But the first movie that I directed, The Rookie, was one that I didn't write. It was a script that was sent to me by Mark Johnson, who produced A Perfect World, who said, there's a guy in Portland, Oregon that wrote a a story, and it's a true story, and it's sports in West Texas, and he's from Portland, and I'm from Spain. So can you read this and let me know if this feels authentic? And I read the script, and I really liked it. I thought Mike Rich did a beautiful job. He'd obviously spent time down there and captured how West Texans talk, how Texans move. It just smelled right, everything about it. And so Mark Johnson, who's a clever producer, said, you know what, I know you've got a couple of things you're supposed to direct. You should direct this movie. And I went, well, no, I'm gonna direct something that I write, because I'll have a leg up on it and really understand where all the bodies are buried, what I need to accomplish. And it'll give me a leg up in directing this first time, because I was worried about getting fired after a week. And he said, well, you've proven that you can go into a room and sell a script, and you can write, but you haven't gone in and auditioned as a director yet. I think it'd be good practice for you. And I thought, well, that actually is good advice. So I read the script 3 or 4 times, went into Disney, and said, the script's great. Here's how I would shoot this. Here's what I'm thinking about thematically. Here's the film stock I would use. I mean, I was over prepared. And I was there for an hour, and they said, thank you. And so I left. And before I got home, Mark Johnson called me and said, you got the job. And I went, what? And he goes, yeah. They said, this is a big risk because you hadn't directed before, but they felt like you were the right guy for it. So anyway, back to your question, it was a real blessing for me to have to interpret a script. And most of it stayed exactly the same, but I worked with the writer, Mike Rich, during prep as we kind of morphed it into something. We'd lean into certain things and pull back on other things, but also locations. You'd have a location that's in the script is one thing, and you go, you know what? I think this would be better. I know it's supposed to take place here. I think this would be better outside. Or sometimes just from a production standpoint, you go, I know it says this takes place in a high school gymnasium, but this is a certain day when we have to have a company move. We're shooting one place in the morning, one place in the afternoon, and there are no gymnasiums within 5 miles of our first location. So where else can we find a shoot? Just those kinds of things. And you lean in themes and things like that. So I was forced to interpret. What that led to was being able to look at a script, whether I wrote it or somebody else wrote it, and say, you get to certain things and go, who wrote this shit? Even when it's you. And that's a valuable thing to have, to be able to go, my job is to interpret. And I think film is very collaborative. As much as I will say the director is far and away the most important person, their mark is on it. Their thumbprint and DNA is all over it. Not to say that the script isn't vitally important, because it is, but the script is really a signature and a DNA and a fingerprint of the director, for better or worse. It's just the way it is. But it's a collaborative process. And I think along the way, everybody's job is to interpret what came before. You know, the screenwriter, in Mike Rich's case, was interpreting newspaper articles and interviews and gleaning from that how to put this document together. I was working on that and interpreting it as a film. The editor comes along, and even though I'm working with the editor nonstop, and they're my choices, I mean, we're looking at stuff together and trying, I want him or her to interpret the footage. And sometimes they'll come up with stuff and I go, I never would have cut that way, but you're right. So I think having everybody interpret every step of the way is important. And I think that was a valuable lesson for me, because I think had I directed the thing, something I'd written, I might have been too earnest in keeping with the text, as opposed to being able to go distance myself from it. So I think you have to. They're two very different hats. And sometimes when, like the little things, the movie I just made, I wrote and directed it, but I had to be able to wear both hats. Even you have a certain shorthand sometimes when a scene's not working, and you go, why isn't this working? And you go, well, because the script didn't accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. So let's sit down. Let's change this right now. What if you say this and then you say this, we add this line, so it helps to be able to put that hat on really quickly and go into writer mode. But I think it's really important to be able to separate the two.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, John. So thank you so much for doing this. So I just wanted to ask, I guess like when you deal with like rejection as a writer or even as a filmmaker, how do you usually deal with this rejection usually?
Yeah, boy, that's a global, broad, great question. I think on the one hand, part of you has to get your back up a little bit. You have to be, you know, when you have a rejection, you have to go, you know what? I'm gonna prosper from this feeling right now that I have. And then you have to analyze it and be your own worst enemy for a bit. You can't wallow in too much, they don't know what they're talking about, or too much, oh my God, I'm awful, they're right. You have to selectively pull from both to be able to gird yourself to go on. I think you have to be honest with yourself about their reasons for passing. Let's say it's a script or whatever. I mean, I just had a script that I sent to Saoirse Ronan, and you know, I just found out like an hour ago that she was passing, and you know, there are a million reasons it goes into an actor passing. She didn't know if it was enough for her. She didn't know she could connect to the character and all that. And that's not necessarily a rejection of my writing. It's just, you know, does she want to spend 9 months doing this or not? When she's got, you know, worlds of opportunity. So immediately, you know, I moved to, instead of going, oh my God, get me in a room with her, I'm going to convince her, I'll write to Saoirse, explain that she's missing this about this character. I went, okay, not to be. You know, there are other great people that will, and that'll end up being the best one. I mean, Julia Roberts, after The Blind Side was set up, Julia Roberts was going to do it. And we were down that path of ways before she decided not to. And it was for all good reasons. She had little kids and she said, I'm just not ready to go back to work constantly again. And you need to make this movie now. The script's really good. I just don't think I can do it. I also think it's a little repetitive for me, from Aaron Brockovich. And the entire project collapsed. And then I said, okay, there's somebody else who's better for this that I'm not seeing. And that's when I met Sandra Bullock, and we started talking. And I committed to Sandy on it. And lo and behold, she was truly the only person who could play that role correctly. So I think you have to rebound quickly and understand that you're going to get 9 no's for every yes, or 99 no's for every yes. But understand who you are, what you're trying to say, but also take seriously any criticism. And I find that, like, I just finished a cut of this movie and I sent it out to 20 friends on Pix, which is, it's a Cure server. And you start getting their comments back, and you have to look behind the notes sometimes, because they'll say, I didn't like this part. And, you know, there's a part of you that's going, well, you're crazy. That part's great. And I found the stuff that I argue back the most vehemently against is usually the stuff I need to look at. If I go, no, you're out of your mind. You're crazy. That's good. It's like tap the brakes. If somebody gives a note and I disagree with it, but I'm really firm in my conviction, it's easy for me to go, yeah, let me think about that. And sometimes something will come from that. But if I go, oh, no, you missed it, you're wrong, then that's usually something that I need to go back and look at, because almost always it's my personality defending something that is indefensible or partly indefensible. So I think you have to be both resilient, but not so like, well, the world's filled with idiots. You know, the world is filled with idiots, but you have to be personal about it. And then you have to also pick yourself up and go, okay, here we go. I'm going again.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. The next question is actually typed out by Ryan B, and he was wondering what kinds of things you do in the time you're not on set to improve your craft as a director.
Good question. I think more than anything, try to find interesting movies and directors and just keep watching and learning. Hopefully I'm getting better, and if I'm getting better, it's because I'm getting more practice and I'm seeing more stuff. And, you know, I like to learn from stuff from, you know, young filmmakers, foreign filmmakers, just just looking at what they do and go, wow, that's a clever twist on something that I haven't seen before. Or really looking at lens analysis. And it's like, boy, they really wanted to make this more voyeuristic. So, you know, the lens selection is interesting. I also try to stay, I'm very fortunate. I've got tons of friends that I'm very close with, that I talk with all the time, that are very talented writers and writer directors, and you know, just having those conversations about what's in the marketplace, what does the marketplace look like, how are things changing? I mean, from, you know, Rian Johnson, you know, writes and directs Star Wars movies, to Benioff and Weiss, who created Game of Thrones, to Vince Gilligan, who created Breaking Bad. These are some of my best friends. So you can have these conversations and learn from these people, and hopefully they sometimes might learn something from you as well. But looking at each other's work all the time. I mean, we always are trading work and saying, okay, be honest. And don't start with, you know, telling me all the things that work about it, because yeah, a lot of stuff works, but there's a lot of stuff that doesn't work. So be honest and you know, and be brutally honest. But yeah, that's, I mean, I don't know. It's not like I've taught film school. I taught at AFI. I give every spring, I mean, I do lectures. I like to teach. Every spring I do a full one-day class at the Stanford Graduate Business School that's on art and commerce in Hollywood. And I enjoy it very much because it's, you know, a good full time of discussion and talk about, you know, change and things like that. Disruption, you know, the favorite word. But, you know, I've taught classes at UVA, at Vandy, at University of Texas, at Baylor, at the USC. I taught an entire course at AFI for 1 year, just because I thought I wanted to get into that world again. I needed to be inspired by young people. You get to the point where you can become a little cynical, and I get very inspired by young people and their ideas.
That's awesome. That's definitely something that we can relate to across almost all industries. We're running out of time, so we're gonna only have room for one more question. But definitely, we're gonna be able to continue this conversation on our online platform. So we're gonna have Nasheen. She was next who wanted to ask a question, so I'll unmute her. All right.
Hello, Mr. Hancock.
Hi.
How you doing, sir?
Good.
I'd just like to say that I could relate to you when it comes to like doing something out of the film side. Like you said, you majored in English, and then you just wrote on your spare time, like started writing your own little screenplays and stuff. I could relate to that because I'm kind of doing the same thing. I'm literally majoring in something completely different that involves films, and I'm just in my spare time. I started working with like writing and stuff. But my question to you is that I have issues sometimes when it comes to writing. That when writing like a quote unquote a screenplay, the proper screenplay for, you know, as a writer, is it? I mean, for me, it's kind of difficult to like try to send out like a positive or like a good message out there in the screenplay, or at least making the readers view it. Because you know, when is it appropriate to like write the action scenes versus the dialogues, or is it like, or does it really just depend on like the type of movie that you're trying to write?
Well, one, you write it all, you know, and
Mhm.
it better come from the same voice and the same pen. I think that, you know, people, when I first started out, you couldn't find screenplays to read.
Yeah.
The movies existed. There weren't even VHSs of the tapes or anything. So there were no screenplay books, how to write a screenplay. There was one. Sid Field had a book, a little book. That was the only one that was out. So learning, you know, kind of a 3-act or a 5-act structure, or kind of what your structure was regardless of acts, understanding how to write characters. But it's a little like, okay, I'm going to learn all the chords on a guitar because I want to write songs, which is awesome. And you learn all the chords and you can play them and you can play a song. It doesn't mean you're ready for Carnegie Hall and to do it professionally. It just means, no, I can craft a song here. Because it starts to become, as musicians say, the difference between good and great musicians is what you do between the notes. And I think as a writer, you start off, because one, it's a crazy foreign format for writers to look at a screenplay. And it takes a while. I think it takes a couple of scripts before the format starts working for you, or at least you're working in concert. I think at the start, it's like trying to figure out how to make it look like a screenplay with my action, my dialogue, my words. And it's a struggle. And that's why I think that it can take 3 or 4 screenplays before all of a sudden you're making it work for you. And by work for you, I mean this. I think when you read a screenplay, it should be, back in the olden days when they had film projected through theaters at the movies, it was 24 frames per second, right?
Yes, sir.
And your eyes, and it was built around the idea, Walter Murch has a whole book on this, about when we blink, when we look at stuff, how we look at stuff, and that goes into lens selection and editorial style and things like that. But the idea is that when do you blink, and in some ways 24 times a second, we're flickering, and your eyes are dancing on an image that appears to be constant. And I think when you're reading a screenplay, you should be able to see the movie in your head, and you should read it in a way that your eyes are dancing on the page, which means you don't want to have it be a page of dense description. No one's going to read it because your eyes are not going to dance on the page. That's a book, do that. I think that when you're writing, for instance, as a young writer, I might be describing a Hollywood apartment, and I would go, interior Hollywood apartment, Ted's Hollywood apartment day, and then you have, your description of it, and I might have a whole paragraph talking about what he had on the walls, his couch, the tears in the carpet, the paint chips on the wall, whatever. I'd describe all that, and it would be really well written. And it took me a while to figure out that what this should be is an interactive experience with the reader. It's not you talking down to the reader and planting this in the reader's brain. It's an interactive experience with the reader using his or her knowledge of the story and what they think Ted's apartment looks like. Now, you want to head them in a direction. And so there was one perfect example in I think it was a Joe Esterhaus, screenplay or something, but it was like, interior, Ted's apartment, night, shitty, period. Every single reader looks at that and has their own idea of what Ted's shitty apartment looks like. Now, you don't have to just say that. You could say a one room efficiency that no one's cleaned in a month, whatever. But just short little blast of things like that, and breaking it up on the page so that there's space on the page so your eyes are dancing. And I think that's something that's just, you just have to learn. You'll get to the point where all of a sudden the format is working for you and you enjoy the format.
Yes. All right. Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. Definitely. That's definitely. I really do appreciate that advice. And I'll definitely try to view it that way, because it's really difficult, when it comes to like when a character's dialogue is supposed to start, and how much you have to explain to the reader, hey, this is what happened, this is where they're at, this is
Yeah, you need to see the movie in your head as you're writing it. I mean, when it becomes easy, it's never easy. You have to sit for 8 hours by yourself. You have to really like your own company. But when time passes quickly in your writing is when you're just the vessel through which this is coming. You've had the idea, you've outlined it, you've got it all mapped out, you know what you're going to do. So then when you start writing, these characters just start talking and you're trying to keep up. That's when it's at its best. You don't want to have to create this, that, or the other. There ought to be a movie in your head. You ought to see them walking around the room. You ought to see them. There's a pause here before this person says this, or, you know, all those kinds of things. But you guys have a huge advantage over me when I started, in many ways. But one of them is you can get your hands on screenplays. You know, you can go on the internet. I mean, find a movie you just loved and you go, that feels like a movie that I would write. And I love this movie. Get the screenplay. You can find it, I promise you. You know, a thorough search on the internet will help you find the screenplay. And then read it and look at it, look at the movie and read it and go, oh, I see where it changed here. I see why they did this. And you'll fall into a certain style. I mean, some writers, William Goldman, who has died just in the last couple of years, who was a great screenwriter, wrote lots of great movies. He had a style that was almost like, his personal style was, I'm going to tell you a story. And it's almost like he put his arm around you and said, isn't that amazing? And he was like talking in the storytelling way to the reader that way. The reader became really involved. And, you know, and his scripts are really fun to read, but that's not everybody's personal style. It was his, and he could get away with it better than anybody. But you have to come up with your own personal style.
Yeah. I really do appreciate all the advice that you gave us today. And I appreciate, just appreciate everything that you taught me here. And I hope I wish you good luck on everything that's going on, Mr. Hancock.
Thank you. It's bringing up William Goldman again. He had the most famous quote in Hollywood, which is "Nobody knows nothing," and that includes me. So, if any of this helps, take it. If it doesn't, you can go, "What an idiot."
Yeah, no, definitely. We really appreciate everything you said, and we'll really take all of this to heart. For those audience members who weren't able to ask a question, we're gonna have a post-event survey sent out in the next 10-15 minutes, and we'll give you the opportunity to type in your questions in there that we can hopefully send out to Mr. Hancock, and he can, if he has time, address those questions in the future.
I can stay if you want. I can stay 10 more minutes if you want.
Oh, okay, that'd be great. Yeah. So we can go ahead and try to answer a little bit more questions, and then at the end of those 10 minutes, if we're not able to answer all of them, definitely feel free to send the questions out to us, and we'll connect back with Mr. Hancock. But the next one was Frez, and he wanted to ask if there's ever been a scene that you found particularly difficult to shoot, and maybe what it taught you.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go with one from The Little Things that I just directed. And it was a scene that read perfectly, without going into too much detail. Denzel Washington plays a very haunted former homicide cop who had something horrible happen 5 years before, and it was a triple murder of 3 girls, 3 hookers, and he's haunted by it because he was never able to solve it. And there's some other things that you find out later too, but he's haunted by it. So haunted, in fact, that when he finds himself back in Los Angeles, and all of a sudden there's a potential suspect, his head can't help but go back to these 3 poor dead women. And there's a scene in a flop house, and we've seen flashbacks to some of the things that happened, and these women were, horrible. It was like the women were abducted, drugged, and stabbed, and they were lying on this rock in this park underneath a bridge when they found them. And so he's in this flop house, and he's in there with a flashlight. The lights are off, and he's got all the information from the cases. He's gotten somebody to pull a file from, and he's pasted them all up on the wall. And he's running the flashlight from their mug shots because they had been arrested prostitutes. And then he lowers the flashlight, and one of the girls faces is right down at his feet, rubbing his feet. And at first you think, is this a hooker from out front? What is this? And he just stares. And then he moves the flashlight over, and there are two other girls. And in the script, they're all naked, because that's in his mind how he saw them last. They were naked and stabbed and all that. And at first, that's how I wrote it. Everybody loved the scene because it was creepy, and it put you in Denzel's head, like he's got to do right by these women. He's got to do right by these women, so much so that he conjures them up. And in the scene, they even talked to him, and told him, it's okay. We don't hurt anymore. Take care of yourself, that kind of stuff. We got to the set and started looking at it. And it was just, there was something about it. There was a creepy factor to these girls being naked. It was lascivious in a way that wasn't intended. It's not like he's conjuring up these girls naked because he wants to see them naked, but there was no way around that even though they were quiet and looked sad and they're kind of partially hidden by darkness in the room and all that, there was something about it that was just lascivious. And so I talked to Denzel and I talked about it, and he said, there's something about it. It just doesn't feel, it feels creepy. And so I agreed. I go, yeah, what can we do? Because I think the scene is really important, but we have to find another way to do it. And so I told our costumer, I said, bring in the autopsy sheets, because they have these white certain sheets that they use in autopsies. They cover you up with and then lower them down. They put it back over you. And so I got 3 of the autopsy sheets and draped them over the girls, because I thought that might be the way he last saw them, which would be on the autopsy table. And there was something that transformed the scene. One, it was no longer lascivious or nude or lewd or bawdy or what's he thinking about naked girls for at all. It became like they were angels with this white draped around them. And it all just came together and worked beautifully. I mean, so beautifully that, on camera, Denzel is watching them and just tears come out of his eyes. So that was one where the scene was not working at all, but we go, okay, well, let's make it work. Let's stop everything, which is hard to do on a set because, man, time is money. And you go, let's figure this out. And we figured it out, and it worked out.
Hisham, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying. At any point, if you're running low on time, just let us know. The next question is by Alex Chang. He asked, do you write differently if you intend to direct that same story?
No, I try to not think about directing the movie at all when I write it, because if I did that, I might not do certain things. I might go, oh my God, I can't have this be another night. Nights are hard to shoot. Nights take twice as long. This is going to, I'm setting this in a Major League Baseball stadium. I've been through that headache. You have to go through so many hoops to get Major League Baseball to let you shoot in their state. I'm not going to write that scene. So I think you have to write it as in a vacuum and separate, and then come and shoot. I mean, The Little Things, believe it or not, is a script that I first wrote in 1993. So, and everybody loved the script through the years, and it almost got made like 5 times. And then after my kid, and it was so dark that I just thought, I don't want to live through this. Once I started directing, I said, I don't want to direct it. Somebody else can. And then finally Warner Brothers came and said, are you ready to direct this? And I said, yes. And so I did. But one of the things I'd forgotten is when I first wrote it, it reads beautifully. But one of the things that was problematic about it was half of it takes place at night, on seedy streets at night. And when you're the writer, you go, I'm not going to be there. Somebody else is directing this. But when you're the director, you're out there every night and you're going, oh man, these nights are killing me. I'm a zombie. So, I try to just write the script, what it's supposed to be. And then, but sometimes when you're looking at a script to direct that I haven't written, sometimes, I'll look at it and go, this is going to be really, really hard. And I'm not afraid of hard work, but knowing yourself and saying, does this play to my strengths or not? I mean, Kelly Marcel's Saving Mr. Banks was one of the most beautiful scripts I ever read. And at first I said, I'm not really a Mary Poppins guy. I'm not, no. And they go, well, the script's really good. You should read it. They'd love for you to, okay, fine, I'll read it. I read it, and I wasn't 30 pages in before I said, oh my gosh, I have to do this. I have to do it. So they're very different enterprises.
Yeah, definitely. The next question is by Janae. I'll go ahead and unmute her. All right.
Awesome. Hi, Mr. Hancock. Thank you so much for being with us all today. I'm a Baylor film grad, 10 years out. And one of the things that I think would benefit all of us is just if you could share how people, that like some of the best tips you have for networking inside of the industry. Because I think what's hard what has been a challenge for me is to maintain contacts, especially if you connect with people and then they kind of are doing something. And, has there been any ways that you have found to be successful that doesn't feel, Hollywood slimy, but really just genuine and authentic, and where people connect and remember you?
I think the main thing is knowing as precisely as you can what it is you want to do. I think when there'll be somebody out of school and they'll contact me through a friend or whatever, and I'll say, what do you want to do? And they go, I'm not exactly sure, but I think I want to write, direct, produce, maybe that, you go, that's way too many options, I'm not saying, I know this goes against my prior advice of try everything, but I think the more precise you are, like for instance, there was one guy who came out of North Carolina School of the Arts or something, and believe it or not, I met him. He was working, but he was working as a bartender at a Belgian beer bar that's been in Pasadena forever. And I'd go in occasionally, and we'd start talking films, and he really loved films. And he just said, you know what, I thought I wanted to do this, that, or the other. I directed in college and all that. I just want to be a PA. I want to start at the bottom and learn. So that was easy. I go, okay, let me work on that. I'll call some people. I'll get you a job as a PA. But that's strict production. If you want to write, if you want to be a writer, write. Because the fastest way in to Hollywood is if you have a script that everybody wants. I mean, Kevin Reynolds, whose dad, Herb Reynolds, was the president of Baylor University. Kevin went to Baylor undergrad and law school, and then went to UT and USC film schools. But he gave me the best advice. He said, when you were little, did your family ever move? And I said, yeah, we moved between first and second grade. He goes, that was hard, right? And I said, yeah, it was hard. He goes, yeah, because you moved to a new neighborhood and it's summertime and school's not started yet, so you don't have any friends. And you're looking around the block and your parents are saying, hey, go make some friends, go walk around. And you go down to the corner lot and there are some kids playing, sandlot football. And, they're picking teams and you're standing around and they don't know you, so they don't pick you and you watch. And then you go back again and they don't pick you and, they play their game. And then it comes your birthday and your father and mother give you a brand new football for your birthday. And you walk down with the brand new football and they see the new ball and they go, hey kid, throw me the ball. And you say, only if you let me play. And that ball is a script. And so if you're going to be a writer, write, because there's no faster way into Hollywood than a script that people love and gets passed around. Directing's harder. You have to show that you can direct. No one is going to. I mean, I can't tell. I've got two friends who won Academy Awards for directing short films, who couldn't get a job as a director because they look at it as a different format. Now they eventually both did get jobs and have done very well. But it took a while. So, directing a short is not necessarily the way in. It can help because you can see an eye towards something. And I wouldn't dissuade anyone from writing and directing shorts. I think they're great for your personal growth and to show people. But, you gotta, if you're going to be a writer, you got to write something that people read. If you're going to be a director, you got to direct something. No one's going to say, I want to mentor you as a director, or I'm going to mentor you as a writer. You have to write something that blows them away or direct something that blows them away so that you're bringing something into the equation. In terms of other jobs, I mean, I've known people that said, I really want to write and direct. And they worked at that and just it never quite happened. And, you know, there's luck and all that stuff involved too. But then they found themselves in, you know, making short films, and they go, I don't really like to be on a set as much as I thought. It's really stressful. And I like to edit. And so, you know, all of a sudden, some of the best editors, you know, start out wanting to be directors. Or they go into sound design or mixing or any other. There are, you know, hundreds of jobs in the entertainment business. In terms of reaching out to someone and saying, here I am, I just graduated from, you know, Baylor or some other college, and what advice do you have? It's like, and sometimes people say, do I need to move to Los Angeles? And I go, you know, if you're a writer, for instance, no, you do not need to move to Los Angeles, but you need to have contacts in Los Angeles. You know, and whether you do that through your work and you get contacts or not, you can live wherever you want to live, as long as New York and Los Angeles are aware of you. So for me, it was the right thing to do to move to Los Angeles. You have to do that less and less now. I mean, with Zoom calls, you know, you can do that kind of stuff. You don't have to fly into LA all the time. But I would say that, yeah, just reaching out, and, you know, it's nice for someone to email you back and say, you know, congratulations on graduating. Here's my advice. It's never going to amount to anything. I mean, and all of a sudden, if you say, okay, I wrote a script. Here's the thing to be careful. If you write a script and you have a connection with someone and they go, okay, I'll read it, it means they'll read 20 pages, because they're going to know in 20 pages whether it's up to snuff or not. But also know that when you send that script out, you only get one shot with that particular person. So make sure that you have rewritten it and have absolutely answered every one of your questions, and everyone you've given it to who has notes, answered all those before you send it out. Because no one's ever gonna, I mean, I can't tell you how many times somebody sent me a script and I go, and there are 4 typos on the first page. Okay, granted, I know that, you know, Hemingway was a bad speller, who cares, right? But it matters. All of a sudden you go, it bugs me, I don't know. Or the formatting's off in a weird way. You go, this person's not trying hard enough to be professional. So I've got work to do. And so I'm gonna read 10 pages and no. And then, you know, then 6 months later, it'll be, I wrote another draft of it, and I don't have time. I can't do it. I mean, it's enough for me to try to read one script to someone. But, so I would say you have to do it yourself. I mean, the thing is, it's easier now for you guys. I mean, you know, look at the movie Tangerine. It was shot on an iPhone. I couldn't do that. You know, when I was back making short films, I had to work on commercials, get film stock, short ends is what they called them, where they had just a little bit of film left in the can, keep them in my fridge so that I could have little short pieces of film to put together to film something. I mean, all of us carry a really, really good camera in our pocket now, a video camera in our pocket. And there's ways to do things, and be creative. Don't think about, you know, Hollywood, the monolith, and how do I break in, and it's going to be through these connections. It may be through these connections, but it's after you have something to show to prove you belong, or to prove worthy of interest. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Sure. One more question?
Yeah, we can go ahead and do one more question. The last one was by Tori Codson. I'll go ahead and unmute you. And again, just as a reminder, if we weren't able to get to your question, at the end, after all this, we'll be sending out a post-event survey where you can send your questions, and we'll try to get that back to John as soon as possible. And we also have a platform on the Ripple website where you can continue this discussion onto there. All right, Tori, the floor is yours.
Hi, Mr. Hancock. Thank you for talking to us. I just had a question. I have a notebook filled with script ideas for all sorts of different forms, web series, short film, features, and I'm just wondering, what's your process for deciding on an idea you have and going full force into it? I know personally, I try and focus on things that I know I can independently produce as a student, so that's a lot of short films, but like, would you recommend going for it and writing a lot of those feature ideas, or what would be your recommendation?
I would do both. I would continue your work on short films and producing something, making something. But I also, in conjunction with that, at some point you gotta bite the bullet and write a script, a full script. Because for some reason or another, Hollywood doesn't necessarily look at a short film script or a short film in the same way as a feature-length script. So, and when you have all those ideas, pick the one that feels like the one you absolutely have to write, like going through, and then start doing the work on it and outlining it, thinking about it for, a couple of months or a couple of weeks or whatever it is. Say, how does this lay out? Because a lot of times there'll be an idea that I have, and then it's not until I start looking at it and working with it that I go, you know what? It's not a screenplay, it's a play. Or I'll go, you know what? It's a short story. That's what it is. That's the form it wants to take. And you have to do the work and start to outline and think about it. It should be, it should lay out. And that's not to say you won't have, oh, I'm missing something here. What am I missing? And then you'll come up with a great idea to fill it in. But you've got to sit down and do the work on it, because just having the idea is great. That's where it starts. But then you've got, A Perfect World started out as 2 or 3 different stories that I was working independently. One was, I was in Longview, Texas until I was first grade. And we lived next to a field. And we didn't have a lot of money. And so we didn't have store-bought Halloween costumes. But one year, we did get to buy a store-bought Halloween costume. And my younger brother, Joe, who was probably 5 at the time, got Casper the Friendly Ghost. And he wore it every single day. So all the way through the winter into the spring, and it starts to get hot, my mom cut off the pants legs to make them short, cut off the sleeves to make them a short sleeve top, so that he could continue to wear it and not sweat to death. And I have these images of him playing in the field by himself in that Casper the Friendly Ghost outfit. That's not a movie. It's just an image that I had in my head. And so I started trying to think about that. And I got to the point where I go, it's a short story and I haven't worked out all the plot yet. But it's a provocative image and there's something about it that speaks to me, so that's over here. There was another one there was a kid who was abducted in Texas City, which was the town we moved to, abducted in the early morning hours by a guy that escaped from Huntsville prison. And nothing bad happened to him, and I grew up with him, and he was released 2 or 3 days later by these guys that abducted him. And they weren't, they didn't abuse him or anything. It was one of those things where they were getting caught stealing a car and grabbed a kid and jumped him in and they took off. In fact, the kid told me, he goes, yeah, we just holed up in this old farmer's house and watched Gilligan's Island a bunch. So, but I was taken with the idea of this kid being abducted by these bad guys, that had broken out of prison, and how the one thing he said was that 2 of them were kind of asses, but the main guy was really kind to him and asked him questions. And I thought, well, that's an interesting relationship. I'm not sure what to do with that one either, so it's here. Then the third one was, I was quite taken with the idea of, after the Kennedy assassination in Dallas, Texas, that has always been a big, very boastful state, and that's part of what's wonderful about it and part of what's head-scratching about it, is it was its own country. It's the only state that was its own country. They still have, the French embassy there in Austin, all those kind of things. So they're prideful in that way. When Kennedy was assassinated, it took Texas to its knees. How could this happen, and how could this happen here? So I was very interested in writing something about a character not involved in the Kennedy assassination, but right either before or after the Kennedy assassination, who was a law enforcement officer who went from being full of himself and cocksure to saying, I don't know anything. So that was Clint Eastwood, and he was the Texas Ranger. So all 3 of these stories then that I'd been working on for 2 years, they were one of many, all kind of congealed together into one. And so, the last line of the movie is, it's the week before, the president's going to come and do a parade in Dallas. But the last line of the movie is, "I don't know nothing, not one damn thing." So that was that Texas Ranger. So all three of those stories kind of came together, and then it was like a eureka moment, all three of them coming together, and I started laying out a plot and thinking about it and thinking about it. Then I started outlining and thinking about it and thinking about it and making notes. And then when I started to write, after 2 years of thinking about these stories and all that, I wrote the script in 2 weeks because it just was pouring out of me. So that's an example of how myriad different, stories that you're interested in can somehow congeal. So keep that in mind too.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much again, John, for spending the extra 30 minutes with us. We really appreciate it all. Yeah, if everyone can just give a virtual round of applause, that'd be great. And again, for those of you who weren't able to get your questions answered, if you can just send that to us in our post-event survey, we'll put that onto our site, and we'll try to continue the conversation there. Thank you again, John, so much. And if you all can just follow us on our Instagram or website and look forward to our future events we have coming up, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you all. Happy day.
Thank you so much, John.
You bet.